Everyone has a chapter in their life that they would prefer wasn't read out loud. We've all made decisions we regret, and some of those actions have hurt our children. But what do we do when we have come to the Lord later in life? When our children are grown and their character has been molded by our poor decisions? If that's a chapter of your story, you will want to hear Jacob's story. A story of hope for those who may have given up hope on their children. Welcome to CrossTalk, a Christian podcast whose goal is for us to encourage each other to not only increase our knowledge of the Bible, but to take the next step beyond information into transformation. Our goal is to bring the Bible to life, into all of our lives. I'm Brian French. Today, Dr. Kent Edwards, Vicki Hitzges, and Nathan Norman continue their discussion through the book of Genesis. If you have a Bible handy, turn to Genesis chapter 41, verse 53, to chapter 47, verse 12, as we join their discussion.
A couple of weeks ago, we caught a glimpse of Joseph's family life in Genesis chapter 37. You may recall the various events that took place there. Nathan, Vicki, how would you describe the family that Joseph grew up in?
Dysfunctional.
It was a cruddy family.
Yeah.
They were crummy. They were all jealous of Joseph. I see it a little differently than you, but I think Joseph was a braggart, and he was the favorite of his father, and the father showed his favoritism. I would think if my parents preferred my brother to me, I would hate it if they told me that and acted like that. Or if they preferred me over my brother. It would be so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Terrible family.
Yeah, I guess I know what my brothers feel like, me being my parents' favorite. I do that all the time to my parents. I'm like, yeah, I know you can't say it out loud, but I'm very well aware that I'm your favorite guys, right? No, but you're right, Vicki. They're so dysfunctional. They put the fun in dysfunction, right? Actually, no, there was no fun in there.
Fun and dysfunction, that's right.
They were gross. I mean, Judah's sleeping with his daughter-in-law, trying to have her killed for getting pregnant, then realizing he's the own father. They murdered a whole town after pretending to be godly. Hey, we want you to follow the one true God with us. Jacob's family was just terrible and morally abysmal, and they multiplied his sin.
Yeah. And don't forget that his brothers all got together and decided they would sell him as a slave for about $100 apiece. They didn't care that his life was ruined and lied to their father that he had been killed by an animal to allow him to go in unnecessary years-long grief. This is a very dysfunctional family, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, what caused that situation? I mean, there's nature and there's nurture. What affected these people?
Well, there's a lot of nurturing going on there, negative nurturing, right? I mean, it probably didn't help that when Jacob thought Esau was about to murder him, he put his kids up front.
Yeah. Yeah, better you than me, kids.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the parenting advice that you want to give.
I can always make more kids.
So why is this so serious? I mean, if Jacob came to his faith in the Lord late in life, after he, as the deceiver, made his life deceiving people, lying and cheating, and his kids were witnessing that and learning from it, all the wrong lessons, why is this so serious? What's at stake?
The whole Abrahamic covenant's at stake.
Yeah. All the nations will be blessed through you. How? With these people? No, you can keep your blessing.
Yeah. So imagine that you are Jacob. You've heard all about the exploits of faith of Abraham and Isaac, and now the whole weight of the covenant is given to you. You come to the Lord later in life after you've wrestled with God, but your kids are a mess. I mean, what do? I mean, we saw a few weeks ago how Jacob tried to testify about his faith and live out his faith, but at the end, his kids didn't respond, and he's left with a mess. So, what I find fascinating about chapter 37 is the way it begins. I don't know if you'd noticed this. I deliberately skipped it when we were in that chapter. We read in chapter 37, verse 1, and the first part of verse 2, that Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob. But then the whole story is about Joseph, right?
Right.
So how in the world is this the story of Jacob if it's about Joseph? It seems to make absolutely no sense until we come down into the following chapters. We have seen, as we look through the life of Joseph, the moral development of that young man, how he constantly made godly decisions, regardless of the consequences. We saw how ultimately God honored him by making him second in command of all of Egypt. And at the end of chapter 41 and through 47, we see why God led Joseph through this path. In fact, in verse 3 of chapter 41, we read God's sovereignty in full display. Vicki, would you read that for us?
Sure. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was a famine in all other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Go down there and buy some for us, that we may live and not die." But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him.
Okay, so now we are going to begin seeing God's sovereign plan for Jacob begin to unfold. His interpretation of the dreams has always come true, and we'll see more of that. But the world is hungry because of a famine. And Jacob will send his boys to go get food, but not Benjamin. Why do you think he wouldn't send Benjamin?
Is Benjamin now the baby?
He's the baby.
Yep.
Well, he's always fond of the baby. Always, always, always. And the baby's going to have the longest life. And if all these other guys end up dying, he wants a son.
Yeah. Well, and remember what happened to Joseph, right? Like he already lost one baby. He doesn't want to lose another.
Exactly.
He sent Joseph, as you recall, to find his brothers to see what was up. And he never returned. I don't think he trusts his boys with his youngest son. They have lost his trust. In chapter 42, we read that they got to Egypt. They didn't take their baby brother because Jacob wouldn't let him, but they arrived in Egypt. And, well, Nathan, just read us what the text says.
When Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Then he remembered his dreams about them.
Do you see how this is tying together?
Yeah.
Do you remember the dreams that he told his brothers earlier? Warning dreams.
Yeah, the sheaves of wheat bowing down, and then the stars in the heavens bowing down.
Joseph recognized here God's sovereign hand. He realized that God had orchestrated his whole life for this moment so that he could be the agent of the moral restoration of his depraved brothers. And he begins the process. And he does so by turning up the heat. It's interesting. Joseph ordered one of their brothers, Simeon, after he gave them their food, to be left behind as proof that they would bring Benjamin with them when they needed more food. Joseph knew this was a 7-year famine. They were only in year 1. They've got no choice. They will be forced to come back. On the way home, what happened? What did they discover?
The money that they paid for the food was in their sacks. So it looked like they had stolen the food or stolen back the money. Something shady had gone on.
And in verse 28, it tells us what? What did they realize at that moment, Vicki?
It says their hearts sank and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" It's interesting they didn't blame each other. They didn't think one of them had stolen back the money.
Right.
These are boys with guilty consciences. These are boys that are struggling with a dark past. And they see God's hand as this. God is doing something here. Jacob's sons made money by abandoning a brother in Egypt. What just happened here? They made money when they left their brother behind. I think that's why their conscience is bothering them. I know Joseph is deliberately setting this up so that God will use this to prick their conscience, to make them feel guilty for all that they have done. Things are heating up. Things are heating up. The metaphor I have in my mind is of a sword that is bent. A sword that is bent is not much good for anything. And the only way you fix it is to put it back in the fire, turn up the heat, and hit it on an anvil. And hit it again and again and again. And when it is done expertly, it is straight, it is sharp, it is useful. I think Joseph is accepting the role that God has prepared him for, to straighten the moral fiber of his brothers. He's giving the heat, and you're going to see action after action as he begins to pound and pound on their moral character until it is transformed. The boys tell Jacob that they cannot come back to Egypt for food unless they bring Benjamin. That was a requirement that Joseph gave them. But in verse 38, Jacob said, "My son will not go down there with you." Why? Why will Jacob not trust Benjamin to the care of his sons?
Well, they've already lost two. They've already lost two, right? They lost Joseph down there, and now they've lost Simeon.
Even though Jacob did not want to send them back with Benjamin, the fact is they ran out of food and they had no choice. And so we read in verse 8,
Judah said to Israel, who's Jacob, his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety, and you can hold me personally responsible for him."
Why is this significant? This commitment that Judah makes.
He hasn't been responsible for anything in his entire life.
No, I mean, last time we got a really good picture of Judah, that was, when he slept with his daughter-in-law, and then when she got pregnant, wanted her executed for prostitution.
Right.
Here, he wants to do what is right. He is making better choices. You can just hear the echo of the strike of the anvil, and as the heat continues to grow. They went to Egypt in search of more food, and they went with Benjamin. Do you remember the story? Do you remember what happened when they arrived the second time?
Yeah, he threw him a feast.
Yeah.
Joseph threw his brothers a feast.
In his own house.
Right.
What's the significance of that?
Well, Joseph's got a really nice house at this point.
Sure. And isn't that kind of a family thing to do?
Right.
And wouldn't that be disorienting for the brothers? I mean, why is this happening? We've come for a commercial transaction. We're afraid of this guy. He's already been angry with us on our first trip, made us keep our brother behind, and now he's throwing us a meal. What's going on with this guy? What's happening? And you may have noticed in the text that this didn't happen until Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them. And when he saw that, he threw a big party. And they were frightened. In fact, the text says that they thought that Joseph wanted to attack them and overpower them as seize us as slaves. Why does he think the text says that? Why is that significant?
Well, that's what happened to Joseph.
That's what happened to him.
Right. Mm-hmm. And if they see this as divine retribution for what they have done in the past, they're just going to assume that God is going to pay them back for what they've done.
Right. And then Joseph says to them in verse 23, what? What does he say there, Vicki?
"Don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." What does that mean, I received your silver?
Well, when they had left on the first trip, Joseph had put the silver that they had used to buy the food in their own sacks. So that's one of the reasons why they were so afraid, because they couldn't figure out why their money had been returned to them.
So is he saying I put it back?
Yeah. I gave it back to you.
Okay. That's not real clear.
Don't be afraid. He says, your God, the God of your father, has given you the treasure in your sacks. Why would a pagan Egyptian official be honoring their God?
Yeah, that's incredibly weird.
Don't you think that would catch them off guard?
Yeah.
I think this is totally disorienting for them. I think they don't know what in the world's going on. They're confused. They know something's happening. God is in this, but they don't understand what. The tension is rising. In verse 29 to 31, when Joseph saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried and looked for a place to weep. And he went into his private room and wept there. And after he had washed his face and came out, controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." Why is that scene so significant?
Well, this is the last connection he has with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
This is his brother from his actual mother, right? All of his other brothers are half-brothers from other women.
Mm-hmm. And I think it means Joseph's attitude in all of this is not vindictive. This is not him trying to punish his brothers. He's not trying to get back at them. He is deeply moved. He is weeping as the sight of the families begins to come together. And then Joseph arranged their seating for this dinner, and he did it in birth order. Why is that significant?
Well, it's almost kind of funny because he's the baby, even though he's the most powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'd be sweating bullets if I was them at this point. Like, how is he doing this, right? Like, you know, Reuben's taller than me, but I'm the older one, right? Like, how... And again, they're incredibly hairy people compared to the Egyptians who have no hair anywhere on their body at all times. And so when people have like facial hair, it's hard to tell like ages apart too, you know? So how does he know to do this?
Well, you're also assuming he didn't ask. Do you think they still, I mean, he didn't even know Benjamin for sure was Benjamin, right?
Right.
He asked.
Yep.
But he had them seated in birth order. I think,
true.
again, they're totally disoriented. And again, they see this as God must be telling this guy. What is God doing here? What is God's hand? The next day, Joseph's brothers headed home, or they thought they were, until something happened. Do you remember what happened?
Didn't he slip like a cup into Benjamin's saddlebag?
Yeah. He had his servant put that cup in Benjamin's bag, slipped it in. And that was not just an ordinary cup, that was his divining cup. So you get the idea that it had great ceremonial importance. So he didn't just steal, silverware from, Buckingham Palace. He stole one of the crown jewels. That's what it looked like. It was a setup. And they're on their way home. And then you see these armed guards chase them down, stop them, open up the sack and say, "Look what we found in Benjamin's sack." And they brought them back for justice. Why do you think he did that?
Turning up the temperature. Trying to freak him out. Like he's freaking him out.
He is totally freaking them out. They think they're going to lose Benjamin. They know it's a setup. They don't know why it's happening, but they're going to lose their brother. And they have promised that they would bring him back. What in the world is God doing here? I think they're asking themselves. And when they come back, I don't know if you noticed in the text, but when they came back, they threw themselves down on the ground. I went down and read through the text carefully. Do you realize this is the third time that they have thrown themselves prostrate before Joseph? Almost like the dream that Joseph told them to warn them. And here it is coming true.
Huh.
They are convinced that Joseph will not show them any mercy. They are convinced that they will lose their brother.
Well, they're convinced of that because they know they don't deserve it.
Of course. And they didn't give it to Joseph in the first place.
Right.
So this is how people treat each other.
And if this is really God's judgment against them. There's no getting out of it. They know that they deserve this. They're helpless in the hands of God.
And so they offer, and this is a great offer. They say, we will all stay and be your slaves, but we won't leave our brother behind. But Joseph says in the text, only the man who was found to have the cup will remain in Egypt as my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace. Their worst fear has been realized. And then, notice in chapter 44 what happens. Starting in verse 18, Judah went up to him and said to him, please, my lord, let your servant speak a word. Do not be angry, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself. My lord asked his servants, do you have a father or a brother? And we answered, we have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in his old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him. And he continues down, and then in verse 33 we read, now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy. Let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. Oh, this is the climax. What did we just see in Judah here? He is the one who suggested they sell him into slavery. He is the one who said, I have so little regard for my brother that I want him a slave in a foreign land. And now he's saying, I will do the opposite. See how his character has changed? The heat has risen. The hammer has fallen. Joseph's work has accomplished its task. Now the man who said, I will sell my brother, said, I will give my life for my brother. Notice at the end of that soliloquy, he also says, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. Do you remember what happened when they sold Joseph into slavery?
He did see that misery and he didn't care.
Right.
He deliberately inflicted it on him. And now he says, I can't live with that. There is a total moral transformation that has taken place. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Yeah. This is that repentance we talked about the other week.
Yeah.
He was going one way, and he is, as Vicki pointed out, that pastor marching across the stage, and he's turned around and is marching back the other way.
And that's why in chapter 45, we read, starting in verse 1, Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him. He said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Do not be distressed. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. His task was completed. He revealed himself and his feelings. That is exciting. That is exciting. And this is the story of Jacob. Why is this the story of Jacob when it's all about Joseph?
Because it's what God did to change Jacob's sons.
Yes.
It's what God did for Jacob.
What do we do when we've messed up our children's lives? I think we do what Jacob did. You trust your life to the Lord, and you trust your children to the Lord. Because the God who loves you loves them. And he can work in their hearts in ways that you cannot. Joseph was doing in his brothers' lives what Jacob could never have accomplished. Notice God sovereignly prepared the exact person his brothers needed to restore them. Only Joseph had the family knowledge that was needed, the selfless character required, and the powerful position necessary to accomplish the task of moral reformation. God moved with sovereign power. He changed the climate of the earth to accomplish this task. That same God can sovereignly help and work in your children's lives as well. He can bring a friend, a boss, or a neighbor into your child's life and speak words that they need to hear, but they could not hear from you. God can and does use others to draw your son or daughter to himself. My favorite scene in this whole story is in chapter 46. Because there, starting in verse 28, we read that Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to get directions to Goshen. And when they arrived, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And as soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Now that's a family reunion. I mean, not only did Jacob get his son back from the dead, but what else was accomplished? What else did he know for sure in that reunion?
He knew his other sons were reformed.
Yes.
Transformed.
Now, they were not moral failures. Now they were patriarchs. Now they were ready to take their place in God's eternal plan. Now, people would look back at the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because God had sovereignly intervened. How can God honor your prayer for the restoration of your children? Well, there's no guarantee. Children still make their choice. But our God is the God of the second chance. And God, when we give our lives to Him, can bring the right people at the right time to give your son or daughter a second chance to find their way home. Home to their Savior and home to you.
If you came to Christ late in life, or if your walk with Christ faltered along the way, and you desire that your children walk with the Lord, but you feel like you've blown it, what can you do? You can feel secure in the fact that God can, if He chooses, bring the right people at the right time in ways we cannot. I trust that today's discussion of God's Word has been helpful and served as an encouragement to not just be hearers of the Word, but doers. Together, let's bring God's Word to life, to our lives this week. The CrossTalk podcast is a production of CrossTalk Global, equipping biblical communicators so every culture hears God's voice. To find out more, or to support the work of this ministry, please visit www.crosstalkglobal.org. You can also support this show by sharing it on social media and telling your friends. Tune in next Friday as we continue our discussion through the book of Genesis. Be sure to join us.